Now let's talk about sight alignment. So what is sight alignment? Well, as we talked about, the firearm has some sort of a rear sight mechanism and some sort of a front sight mechanism, right? So usually it's some sort of a post on the front and some sort of a U shape or trough shape on the rear. So what we have here is just a little rough design of our rear sight, so this would be on the back of the gun, and our front sight, it would be on the front of the gun, just a little post. This is obviously what we're trying to line up when we're aiming at our target. So how do we want to line these up? Well, this right here is what we call ideal sight alignment. Ideal sight alignment means we're level across the top with our rear sight and front sight. A nice straight line there. So that means not down here, not up here. We're just nice and level. Also, it means we're centered in between the rear sights. So we have an even amount of space here and here. Not like this or this. So we'd be centered with a nice level top. That would be ideal sight alignment. Now, how do we want to line this up on our target? Well, we want to cut our target in half, as we see here. Cut the target in half. This would be an ideal sight alignment onto our target. Now, this is true for most firearms. However, with 1911s and most revolvers, you actually want to use a technique called lollipopping. You want to lollipop the target. And that means that we set the target right above our front sight. So you see how it kind of looks like a lollipop there, right? So that's called lollipopping the target. Again, this is for 1911s and most revolvers. But for most firearms, you want to cut that target in half, like so. So I want to cut that target in half with ideal sight alignment. If we shoot like this, we're going to shoot a bullseye as long as all of our other fundamentals are in place. So now a lot of times people get a little confused on all this and they go, oh, I don't remember which way, what does this do if the bullet goes which way if I pull the sight this way? Does it go left, right? I forget, I get confused. So we're going to help you break this down and make it really simple. This would be the rear sight, right? This is on the back of the gun. This is the front sight. It's on the front of the gun. Which does the bullet pass under on its way to the target as its final point of contact with a firearm? Well, it passes under the front sight, right? This is at the tip of the barrel, right at the muzzle. So if this is at the tip of the barrel, that means this is the last point of contact the bullet has with a firearm. This means wherever the front sight goes, that's where the bullet's going to go. So with that being said, if you point in this manner, you're going to shoot a little bit to the right. If you were aimed like this, you're going to shoot a little bit to the left. Like this, you would shoot a little bit low. And like this, you would shoot a little bit high. So when we're shooting, that means we've got three things to think about. We've got our target, we've got our front sight, and we've got our rear sight. How many things can a human eye focus on sharply at one time? One, right? So out of these three things, what do you think we should be focusing on sharply? Well, a lot of people say, well, I've got to focus on my target. But do you? Well, let's think about what we just talked about. What is very important for us to focus on? What determines where the bullet goes? The front sight, right? The bullet follows the front sight. Therefore, your sharp focus should always be on the front sight. This should be sharply in focus. Your rear sight should be a little bit fuzzy and blurry. Your target should be a little fuzzy and blurry. Your front sight should be sharply in focus. Now, a lot of people say, huh? How can I have my target blurry and still hit it? I don't understand. Well, I want you to do me a favor while you're sitting here. Look at something around you right now in the room somewhere, maybe a picture. Look at a decent sized picture. And I want you to go ahead and take your little trigger finger here. I want you to pretend that it's your front sight. And I want you to just kind of extend your arm out so your elbow's locked. Focus on your front sight there and point at the center of that picture for me. Did you do it? Are you able to point at the center of the picture? Are you sure it's the center of the picture? Well, how do you know? Well, here's the thing. Our brain does all these wonderful calculations for us. Our brain loves to find the centers of objects. That's what makes our brain comfortable. It likes centers. So whether you know it or not, you've been pointing at the centers of things since you were this big, since you were just a tiny person. You've been able to say, hey, I want that piece of candy over there. Hey, look at that over there. Hey, check out that airplane in the sky. And you can point at the center of an object without giving it any thought. You don't need to have crosshairs and bullseyes and diagrams to figure out where the center of a target is. Your brain naturally takes the outline of an object, no matter what its shape, and it figures out where the center is without you ever thinking about it. So this is step one to good secrets to marksmanship, is that most people overthink their target. You now know you don't have to think about your target. Your brain wants to find the center for you. So now we know about the brain liking to find the centers of targets. In fact, many times what we'll do when we're teaching students is we'll flip the targets backwards and we'll push them out, and you'll see the students actually shoot better on the targets when they're flipped around backwards with no bullseye showing than they shoot with the bullseye actually showing. And this is because, again, people try to overthink their targets, and overthinking actually causes them to miss the target because they're focusing so hard on what they're doing instead of just doing what comes a little more naturally. Now let's talk about another secret of marksmanship that very few people know. Take that finger that we talked about again. We're going to make it our front sight post, straight up in the air. We're going to lock our elbow. And if you need to close one eye or the other to focus more sharply, that's fine. We're going to talk about eye dominance in a little bit. Just go ahead and close whatever one's comfortable for you for now. And we're going to point this at the center of an object. What I'd like you to do is, maybe while you're sitting there, we want it to be a tiny object, so try pointing, if you can, if it's convenient, point at the crosshairs here on our logo. Or find something else about that size, something nice and small that you can cover with your entire finger. Now what we want you to do is point that finger out there, focus on your front sight, your finger, and hold it steady on that object. Is it holding perfectly steady? Perfectly steady? Or is it moving a little bit? Well, stop moving it. Just kidding with you. You can't help it. Of course it moves a little bit. Go ahead and relax your finger. It's moving because we have breathing going on in our body. We have blood flowing through our body. There's a lot of things going on. Some of us, like me, have a lot of caffeine in our body, right? So we're a little bit shaky. We're not real still when we're holding our finger out there, especially with our arm extended out. It gets a little bit heavier. Now imagine trying to hold perfectly still with a firearm in your hand. Now it's going to get a little more weight. It's going to be a little more tough. It's going to move. Well, guess what we've just done? We've alleviated the excuse that a lot of people make, and that is, I can't shoot very good because I can't hold real still. You don't have to. Here's a trick to marksmanship. You don't have to hold still to be a good shot. So let's talk about this. Why don't you have to hold still? Well, again, put that finger back out there on that tiny object for me. Finger straight up, elbow locked out, and watch how it moves on that object. Is it moving in erratic directions just all over the place where you have to pull it and force it back onto the center of the object? Or is it just kind of floating? Yeah, it floats, right? You don't have to force it back into place. If you try to force it, you actually overshoot where you're trying to get back to, right? Try it. If you force it, it doesn't go where you want it to go. If you let it float, it comes right back to the center of that object naturally. In fact, if you look at it closely, it's probably making kind of a sideways figure eight, right? Doing kind of a sideways figure eight, but it continues to bounce right back to the center of that object. This is, again, your brain doing the work for you. Again, this is where many people get themselves in trouble because they try to overthink this and they try to force their sights onto the target. And they don't realize that if they just let them kind of float, they're going to get there. They're going to be right where they want to be. Just take advantage of that natural floating that's going on with the front sights. Don't fight them, float them. Now we know about how our front sight is operating on the target, moving in that sideways figure eight motion, but Isn't this going to affect my marksmanship? Or do I have to get that trigger to break right when that bullseye hits that center of the object? Well, let's talk about that. Let's take our little diagram here of our front sight and rear sight. Now we talked about if I got an ideal sight alignment, lined up like this on my target, and I were to shoot at 5 feet back, all of my other fundamentals being good and sound, where am I going to hit on the target? I'm going to hit the bullseye, right? Now if I back up 25 feet, all my other fundamentals are good and sound, and I'm lined up like this on the target at 25 feet, where am I going to hit? Bullseye, right? And I can keep on going back all the way 75 yards, or excuse me, 75 feet, the length of the range, the indoor range. And I can do the same thing. I'm still going to hit bullseye if everything else is sound, right? But let's say that I pull this all the way to the left. My front sight is pulled all the way to the left. And I line up on the target like this, everything else being sound, at 5 feet away. Am I going to hit bullseye? Well, of course not. I'm going to hit a little bit to the left, right? Now let's say I back up to 25 feet. Am I going to hit the bullseye? No, I'm going to go a little further left because there's more space now for the bullet to travel at that wrong angle, right? So now let's say I back up to 75 feet. Again, the length of an indoor range on average. So I'm at 75 feet lined up like this. What's going to happen to my bullet? Am I going to hit the target? Some people say, oh, you're not even going to hit your target. You're going to be off the target. I mean, you're going to hit the person's target next to you in the next lane. Well, I got a surprise for you. With this being the alignment all the way to one side, like so, backed up at 75 feet, all other things being equal, guess how far off the bullseye you're going to land? About 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches. This means that if you backed up to 75 feet and you were shooting either here, 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 or here at 75 feet, your grouping would be within a 3-inch radius. Would you be happy with a grouping like this at 75 feet? Yeah. Who wouldn't be happy with a grouping like this at 75 feet, right? So if all your shots are capable of doing this at that distance, now consider that the average shooting takes place for people that are doing target practice somewhere between 20 to 30 feet. That's less than half this distance. That means you're going to shrink that way down. You'd be very happy with this type of grouping. So what does that tell us about our sight alignment? Not that crucial, right? And again, this is where novice shooters make a big mistake. They focus so hard on their sight alignment that they hurt themselves. In reality, sight alignment is not that crucial. You should have your front sight somewhere in between your rear sight area, but it's not crucial that it be dead lined up, dead center, even across, just like so. It can be anywhere in here, and you're going to get where you want to get on your target as long as all other fundamentals are sound. So again, we go back to that little floating sideways 8, that sideways figure 8 that our front sight is making. It's okay to let our trigger press happen anywhere inside of here, right? Anywhere inside of here. Now, this is really good news because unless you're doing something ridiculous, it's pretty much impossible to get your front sight lined up like this on a target, right? It's going to be somewhere in here. So as long as you point the gun in the general direction of the target, you're probably already automatically going to be somewhere in this area. It's just a matter of getting it roughly in line with the center of your target by, again, letting your brain take over, find the center of the target. Don't worry about the marks on the target. Let your brain find the center of the target. Now let's talk about eye dominance, because this is a question that comes up very frequently is, what do I do about shooting? Do I keep both eyes open? Do I shoot with one eye closed? If I close an eye, which eye do I shoot? So we're going to talk about eye dominance, and we're going to talk about how to figure out what's your dominant eye and how you should shoot. So the first thing we're going to tell you is that if you can shoot with both eyes open, that's great. Do it, by all means. But we'll also tell you that about 85% of the population, including a lot of professionals, have to close one eye to get an accurate sight alignment picture. So if you close an eye, that doesn't make you a bad shooter. It's okay. And some people will tell you, oh no, you have to keep both eyes open. You got to do it. It's up to you. But really, you can shoot effectively with one eye closed. You can shoot effectively with both eyes open. It's a matter of what works for you. So if you are able to shoot with both eyes open naturally, that's a huge bonus for you. Take advantage of it, and by all means, keep both eyes open while shooting. But what happens for most people is they get their eyes competing, trying to take over. And so one eye or the other starts trying to find the front sight, and maybe one will come in focus, and all of a sudden the other eye will take over, and then it'll look like this is the front sight, and then this is the front sight. And you end up getting two different front sights going on, and you can't tell which one to focus on. So it's important that if that's happening, you close an eye, pick one of those sights to stick with so that you know which one you're going to use at all times to develop a consistent shooting pattern. So let's talk about eye dominance. How do you know which eye is your dominant eye? Well, we're going to give you a really simple test. Let's find our front sight again. Let's find an object that we can cover with that front sight. What we're going to do is we're going to keep both eyes open, and we're going to line up on an object. We're going to do our very best with both eyes open to line up and cover an object with that front sight. Then what we're going to do is we're going to close our left eye first, and we're going to see, is that still covering the sight or covering the object? If it is, that means that we are right eye dominant. But if we close our left eye and the front sight moves off of the object, that means we're probably left eye dominant. And to confirm that, we again cover that object with both eyes open and try closing the right eye. Now, if that object remains covered, that means we're left eye dominant. If the front sight moves off of the object when we close our right eye, that means we're probably right eye dominant. So that's how we're going to figure out which eye is our dominant eye. There's another trick you can use where you take your hands and you make a very small, tiny little slit right here in between your the two webbings of your hands, just a very tiny slit, and you peek through at an object. Usually it's helpful if you're peeking through at somebody else, because when you peek through with both eyes open, they can instantly see which eye you're using to peek through at them with, because one of those eyes has done it and you didn't realize it, taken over, and they can see through that little slit whichever eye it is looking at them, and they can tell you right away if that's your dominant eye, because that's the one you naturally use to find me. So now that you know which eye is your dominant eye, what do you do with that information? Well, a lot of times people will say, okay, great, I'm a right-handed shooter, I'm right-eye dominant, or hey, I'm a right-hand shooter, but I'm left-eye dominant. What do I do? Well, here's the thing. If you're shooting a rifle or some other type of long gun, you have to use your right eye. And the reason for this is just because of the makeup. You can't peek over the top of a rifle or long gun and use your left eye. You're resting it so that you're using your right eye down the barrel. So if you're a right-handed shooter and you're shooting a long gun, you're going to have to shoot with your right eye open. That's all there is to it. If you're a left-handed shooter, you're going to need your left eye. But for handguns, it doesn't really matter. You get to choose, because for handguns, you can shoot as a left eye dominant person if you're a right-handed shooter, or you can shoot with your right eye. You can choose either one, whichever one you want, as long as it's consistent. If you consistently use the same eye, you can use whichever one is most comfortable to you while you're shooting. Now, a trick you can use if you want to learn how to shoot with both eyes open, but you know that you need some help focusing on that front sight because both eyes are competing, is you can take your eye protection, your shooting goggles, and then you can take a piece of Scotch tape and just pull that off of there, just a small piece. And let's say I want to practice shooting with my right eye open, but closing my left eye, and maybe I have trouble closing my left eye. So this is a trick I can use. I'm going to take this Scotch tape and I'm going to put it right on the left goggle here, just somewhere across the middle. And I don't put it on there very tight, I just kind of leave it loose on there. And then when I put this on, I can now see with my left eye, all of my peripheral vision and all that other good stuff. But it's impossible to focus sharply on my front sight because it blurs out my ability to focus sharply with my left eye. So this lets me keep both eyes open, but I can now focus sharply with my right eye on the front sight. So this is a trick you can use to try to build your abilities to keep both eyes open while shooting.